The National Catastrophe Relief Auxiliary, abbreviated as NCRA, was a federal agency tasked with disaster relief operations within the United States in the event of a major catastrophe or war. In the years before the Great War, the National Catastrophe Relief Auxiliary established an automated government aid drop system. In the event of a national emergency, authorized NCRA personnel could use the U.S. government supply requisition holotapes at emergency broadcast terminals found at the relay towers to summon airborne supply drops, which were delivered by cargo bots. This system allowed the efficient delivery of emergency supplies in the event of a complete breakdown of the human-run supply chain. It is highly probable that the U.S. government was aware of the oncoming attack. As stated in Nancy Croydon's log, NCRA units mobilized in the early evening of October 22nd and deployed throughout the greater Washington area. The NCRA remained on alert in the event of a catastrophe. The cause of the mobilization was kept secret from even the presiding officers of each unit, but rumors spread of an imminent Chinese attack. On October 23rd, the Great War erupted and Washington, D.C. was hit by several nuclear bombs. One National Catastrophe Relief Auxiliary unit was on evacuation assignment on the Belt Loop. Units farther from D.C. were spared from the immediate blasts, including Response Unit MD-478, commanded by Presiding Officer Nancy Croydon, which was deployed to Germantown. Surviving response units now began to oversee the evacuation of civilians and the medical treatment of injured and radiation poisoning victims at their designated evacuation centers. As of her first log, Nancy Croydon noted how the unit had not been debriefed, another indication that something major was happening. On October 23rd, the Great War erupted and Washington, D.C. was hit by several nuclear bombs. Because of Response Unit MD-478's poor performance in the last round of drills, the unit was assigned to rural areas outside Washington, D.C., while higher-scoring units were assigned to the urban areas. Ironically, this saved the unit from immediately being wiped out by the initial nuclear blasts. Almost immediately following the nuclear exchange, Response Unit MD-478 became overwhelmed by the number of injured and sick. Looting also became increasingly widespread, and scuffles at the evacuation center had taken place. Nancy Croydon was therefore relieved when a National Guard unit arrived from Pennsylvania after an all-night journey. Despite the arrival of the National Guard unit, the situation continuously deteriorated and Response Unit MD-478 suffered a severe lack of supplies. Even worse, two members of the unit, Rebecca and Dolores, deserted and headed for a nearby vault with some of the survivors from the evacuation center. Sometime later, Nancy Croydon took her NCO's advice and set up a quarantine area for the worst of the radiation victims in an effort to calm the other survivors and patients who did not know that radiation poisoning was not contagious. It also made it easier for the staff to smuggle the bodies out at night. With supplies dwindling fast, the unit was running out of Prussian blue for the treatment of radiation victims. Nancy Croydon dispatched a group of National Guardsmen to a nearby cancer treatment facility to get additional supplies, though she knew that supplies would only stave off the inevitable, widespread radiation poisoning. The National Guardsmen never returned, or presumably either died or deserted, leaving Response Unit MD-478 on its own without desperately needed supplies. At this point, whiskey was used as a supplement to painkillers, and the situation was so bad that the nurses and doctors could do nothing more than make the patients more comfortable as they awaited the end. Not long after, Nancy Croydon died of radiation poisoning. To the end, she regretted how she could not have been the last one to go so that she could have helped the remaining staff and patients before they died. The agency, like the rest of the federal government and military, disintegrated and ceased to exist as the chain of command collapsed and personnel fell victim to either nuclear fallout or just plain deserted. 25 years after the Great War, in 2102, the NCRA's automated government aid drop system continues to function in Appalachia and has been repeatedly utilized by the residents of Vault 76. The National Catastrophe Relief Auxiliary appears to be the fictional equivalent of the real-world FEMA. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for more.